Okay, so I packed that in pretty good. You can see I still got plenty of spaces down here for the spirits to work through it, get percolated down in there. But I still wanted it pretty dense in there because, again, that's where my medicinal value is. And when I talk about making tinctures out of old leaves and flowers and things like that, I usually tell people 80 proof vodka is good. That's not a problem. But if you're going to make with bark or with roots, and especially since this tincture is then going to be mixed with honey or maple syrup, whichever one that you want to use. I personally prefer honey because I find it has its own healing qualities to it. Maple syrup does too, but honey really does have some good healing qualities to it. But if you're working with barks or roots or more thick, heavy things, I recommend going with a stronger alcohol content of at least 100 proof, which is 50% alcohol. If you can't use that, like say you could only get 80 proof, because I know in certain states you can't get like Everclear and things like that. If you can only get 80 proof, then just leave it set for a couple extra days. We're only going to leave this sit for about 24 hours. So this here is, well, let's see, it's in its own bottle. And it doesn't have, where's the top? It still has the tag. Somebody gave me this thing for honey, and glass bottles are sacred in this house. People who come to my house a lot of times will bring me egg cartons and glass bottles because both of those things I don't buy them, so, or very many of them, and so I can always use glass bottles. And anyway, so this is a little bit stronger than 100 proof. In fact, this is probably close to 190 proof, if not. No, I'd say right or between 180 and 190 proof is probably what this is here. If you can get Everclear, that is going to be that's probably going to be about the strongest alcohol you can buy. If you do have Everclear, though, realize you are carrying around a Molotov cocktail. It's highly flammable. Don't store it near anything that's flammable, and don't use it near flames because the whole bottle can go whoosh real fast. But anyway, at least 100 proof if you can. If you can't, again, just let it sit longer. And now we're going to do the hard part. We're going to pour this in. Now you can kind of see I left a little spot on the top. I'm going to want to make sure I'm going to try to get this covered as much as possible. Because I'm working with pine bark and alcohol, I'm not super worried about it. The alcohol is a preserver. And then we're going to cover it. Now you see there's one that's kind of poking out. If I have one that's poking out, I'll stick it so it goes underneath the alcohol at least a little bit. And then that alcohol will coat it. Now it's popped back out. I'm not going to worry too much about it, especially since we're only going to let this sit for tops. This one's going to sit for 24 hours. But tops, I'd say about 48 hours. And we're just taking the medicinal value of the pine, and you can already smell. You can smell the alcohol in the pine. The minute that alcohol hit the pine, you could smell the two of them combining. I'm making several things of syrup for it, so I can give that away to people who are not feeling well. This is just, this is just a Nestea. The old glass ones. I think they're made out of plastic now, but the old glass Nestea. Where you got that powdered tea stuff. Somebody gave me that. I keep anything that has glass, especially if it has a lid. I keep glass and lid. I have a section of my basement that's just set up for glass jars because I can always find uses for them. And I'm not really big. People will find very quickly that I'm not really big on buying stuff. Life kind of got away from me a little bit, so this is actually sat for just a little over 48 hours, actually. So this is nice and strong. We've got a nice, strong white pine bark tincture going here. We're going to strain it out. And what I've got is basically I've got a colander here with a couple layers of craft cloth in it. And that'll work fine for getting out the little bits and pieces. So I'm just going to pour this through, and I may end up having to put you guys down for a minute. One second. I'm just trying to do now is strain out the plant material. You can see the spirits, the liquor has really pulled out a lot of the pine bark goodness. Of course, this works a lot better if I have two hands. But basically, you can see down here what we're getting is the spirits. Now this is alcohol, and one of the main reasons we use alcohol as an extract for the pine bark is because white pine bark is highly nutritious. And I'm going to mix this with honey. And this is what's going to be my cough syrup. And if I did it with just strictly water, or if I did it like part water or part alcohol, something like that, it may not be enough to keep the tincture, once I mix it with honey, from fermenting and making basically a white pine bark mead, which doesn't sound the greatest to me. I'm trying to not have this ferment, so we did this strictly with alcohol. Alcohol is a preserver. It has its preserving qualities, so that's the reason we did it with alcohol, and why we did it with a slightly higher percentage. The slightly higher percentage of alcohol, instead of 80 proof, we went with minimum of 100 proof, is for two reasons. The first is bark is obviously much denser, stronger material to extract your medicinals from, and the higher alcohol content will act as a preservative when we're mixing it with the honey. So I'm going to let this sit for a little bit. I'm going to actually kind of get the stuff out of the jar, because see, this stuff isn't coming out of the jar. But I'm going to kind of get that out of the jar, and then we'll go from there and mix it up with a little bit of honey. So I'll be back in just a little bit. We're going to, so we've got our white pine tincture here, and this is alcohol that has extracted the medicinal value of the white pine bark. And we're going to turn this into a syrup. And if you ever have seen me do this with tea, where I take and boil in water, or pour boiling water over something and then make a syrup, like when I make violet cough medicine. Violets, what I do is I stuff the jar just as full of violets as I can, pour water over it, and I leave it sitting in the sunlight for a couple days until the violets, until basically you get this beautiful purple tea, sun tea of violet sun tea. And then we add the honey to it. I try to use raw honey all the time. This is from my bees, so I use raw honey all the time because I don't do anything with mine, but I recommend to use raw honey. But when you're making with a tea, you need to do double the amount of honey to your tea. So like if you've got a cup of violet tea, sun tea, then you need 2 cups of honey. And for that, the reason for that is honey and water mixed together begins to ferment very quickly. And honey is your preservative, so you need more of that, the honey, to act as a preservative of the medicinal qualities of the violet. Well, at this point we used alcohol as our extraction, as our medium, and that means that the alcohol is our preservative. So honey at this point is just an addition to make it a more pleasant thing to take. You don't even need to add honey. If you want to just take a few dropperfuls of this, put it in water and gargle with it, that's great for sore throats. You don't need to do anything more. I like to turn it into a syrup, but I don't have to at this point worry about getting the syrup and the double amount of the syrup to the tincture at this point, because I already have a preservative. It's alcohol. Water's not a preservative. Alcohol is a preservative. Salt's a preservative. Acid is a preservative, and your sugars are preservatives. So I'm not using the honey as a preservative. I'm mixing it with the alcohol. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it to taste. And I'm just going to probably put in maybe most of this, maybe part. I'm just going to mix it until it gets to the point that I like the flavor of it. So I'm going to start doing that now, and I'll be back in just a little bit. Now, honey and alcohol usually mix pretty good, but if you find it's not, you can warm it up. I'm a little concerned just because it's a very, very cold day today. It's about, right at this moment, it's about 3 below zero. It's been much colder today. And so I'm thinking the alcohol may be a little cold, but Honey, like I said, honey and alcohol usually blend together. The alcohol will start breaking the honey down. It's basically what's going to happen. So I just add it little bit by little bit. And then when I get to a point that I want to try it, which we're coming fast to, and it, of course, as the honey gets in there, will get thicker and thicker. And of course, you have to stop and lick the honey from time to time too, because that in itself is part of the healing process. Making things, it's just as healing as using them if you go at it from the right perspective. The joy of we've worked with, of course, well, I guess I can't tell you that I made the alcohol, but I may or may have not have made the alcohol. Of course, that would be illegal, so of course I didn't make the alcohol. Just to confuse you there. The honey comes from my bees that I work with, and the white pine is a big tree in my yard that, due to the wind, lost some of its branches, and so I put them to use instead of letting them just go to waste. So I'm going to give this a little taste. Ooh, and it's got that flavor of medicine because you have alcohol in it. But that's good. But I am going to add just a little bit more, and I thought I would be adding most of this honey to it, and I was not. I was thinking I had about 2 cups of tincture, and I was thinking I was going to be adding about 1 cup of honey. But again, it's done. This is done for flavor. The honey, yes, is another medicinal, so that in itself will help. Raw honey, local raw honey. Okay, and there we've got it. Now you can take this stuff straight, like a couple tablespoons of this straight to help with a cough. It also is really good if you take this and swish it around in your mouth. It'll help kill off bacteria in your mouth. Or you can, because it does still have an alcohol flavor to it. It's not, at this point, it's not super bad, not a super strong alcohol flavor, but it does still have one. And so you can put this in like your 2 tablespoons that you were going to take. You can put it into 8 ounces of water and drink that down. I've got a couple of these, but I just grabbed one of these real quick. I am going to store this in some dark glass bottles. I'm doing this because basically I was given, as a gift, I was given 10 cases of these, so that's 120 bottles. So, yay, I love that. So I'm going to use them. But if you don't have the amber glass or the green glass or a dark glass, just put them in a dark place. Or if you can't do that, put them someplace and throw a dark blanket over the top of them. You want it to be kept stored in the dark. Got several more of these bottles all set up. But this is what we're working with right now. And this is white pine syrup. It is great for sore throats. It's great for gargling. It's great for if you've got an upper respiratory infection. It helps with that. If you got a cough, that's what it's mainly used for. So I'm going to just, of course, as the old saying goes, label, label, label. So we're going to label this up. You can make fancy labels. You'll find at my house a lot of times there'll just be some handwritten label from, the store that I've got on. I have even used duct tape where I've put some duct tape over the top of it and wrote what it is. Always write what it is plus the date. So that is making white pine bark cough syrup. Simple, easy. White pine bark soaked in alcohol, or at least 100 proof alcohol, for at least 24 hours. You can go 48, you can go 72 hours. Strain off the plant material, and your alcohol is your preserver, so then mix honey to taste, and you've got your syrup. Very good, and you'd be shocked at how well it works, because what you notice is you'll be coughing, and then you take this, and all of a sudden you realize your body has been able to rest for a couple hours because it hasn't been going on coughing, Jay. White pine bark cough medicine.